If you want to find out why you're experiencing fatigue, making excuses and procrastinating, then keep watching this video so you can work out what identity type you are and what that means for you reaching your most ambitious goals.
Suffering from depression and getting no answers, I packed up my life and went on a 90-day mission to find help from the world's top biohackers, neuroscientists and doctors. And now I'm here to help you biohack your mind and body for success. Welcome to Becoming Unstoppable. Lifestyle hacks for your body, mind and business.
Before we kick off, be sure to hit like, subscribe, and make sure you leave a comment at the end of this video. My name's Ben Angel. If you haven't heard of me yet, I'm the author of the brand new best-selling book called Unstoppable, a 90-day plan to biohack your way to success. What I uncovered when researching this particular topic, how we become peak performers, is when we look at peak performers, we typically look at their peak performing psychology, but we don't ever look at the biochemistry that supports that peak performing psychology. And throughout this process, speaking with neuroscientists, doctors, biohackers, psychologists, clinical social workers, and going through all of the research, I uncovered 4 unique identity types. Now, what is an identity type? Well, when it comes to identity, we tend to think that it's fixed and it stays there forever. But the reality is, as we transition throughout our careers, our identities typically evolve as we gain new skills, as we experience new things. But the factor that is never considered is, what is our energy level like? So if you take a personality test, when you're feeling your absolute best, you're going to get one result. But what happens to that individual if you suddenly introduce a nutritional deficiency, you introduce fatigue, you introduce toxins into their system? That specific individual, their personality is going to change. They'll most likely become depressed, anxious, even angry, and start making excuses and suddenly want to quit. So the process in which we look at peak performance is typically only looking at one side of the equation, the psychology, but ignoring it to the price of our biology and our biochemistry. To uncover this data, we in fact surveyed over 10,000 entrepreneurs internationally, and here's what we found. There are 4 specific identity types. There's the defender, guardian, synergist, and catalyst. So a defender and guardian sit below the 50% threshold required for peak performance. When we sit below this 50% threshold, we experience everything from anxiety, fear, depression, and this is a situation where we actually need to go out and seek medical attention, because it's not just our psychology that's off, it's also our biology that's off as well. In this case, once we biohack our biology, our brain and our psychology all comes back into alignment and we start feeling better. In this state, they're also in a situation in which they're in unconscious creation. They're not aware of what's going on. And this is simply because they've turned on what is called self-preservation mode. So self-preservation mode is when we hit below this 50% threshold, all of a sudden our primal mind takes control of the situation. And it takes control because our brains and our bodies are starved of energy and specific nutrients. When self-preservation mode comes on, we're in that constant state of fight or flight when we're anxious about everything, we're catastrophizing, we're always thinking that the worst case situation is going to occur. We're also going to make a myriad of excuses. So when our primal mind kicks into gear, it has to prioritize vital bodily functions over the ambitious goals that you want to achieve. In this state, your ambitious goals are actually perceived as a threat to the primal mind for the health and safety of your life. Now, when we hit this particular state, you will be making excuses. You may feel depressed, you may feel unmotivated, and you may experience apathy where you just really don't feel anything at all. When the primal mind is switched into gear, it's not just simply a case of a weak mental attitude, which many individuals misdiagnose this situation as. It's also the case that there are other factors that are playing out within their life that are impacting their psychological well-being, well-being and how much they get done and how they look at the world. On the other side of the 50% threshold, where we have the peak performers, we have synergists and catalysts. So a catalyst is the absolute epitome of a conscious creator and peak performer. They have the energy requirements to go out and reach their most ambitious goals. Just below that, we have synergists. So synergists are on the cusp of this 50% threshold, and they could go either way. They may elevate themselves through rest and recovery and turn themselves into a catalyst. But if they're simply on the cusp of the threshold, if they do too much psychological output, ultimately they're going to pay a biological price, which will see them drop below this 50% threshold and turn themselves into a defender and a guardian. And it's really important in our hustle until you die culture to understand that you can't pay a high psychological price without paying a high biological one. That's why we see many peak performers, when it comes to achieving their goals, they'll have a massive burst of energy, they'll launch themselves into the stratosphere, but after a while, if they keep working 12, 14-hour days or 7 days a week, they start paying that biological price. That momentum is suddenly going to drop, in which case they have to rest and recover, then relaunch themselves again. And I want you to think about this like launching a rocket into space. It requires 90% plus of the fuel, the energetic resource, to launch the rocket into space, and then it can just cruise along. The problem that we have with many peak performers is that they build up all this energy, all this momentum, they launch themselves, then they come crashing back to earth. So they never really break through and they never really break free of this particular pattern. This also sees a major change in our personality. So our prefrontal cortex is in control of our rational thinking as well as our personality and ultimately our well-being and the way that we see the world. When we switch into self-preservation mode below the 50% threshold, all of a sudden our primal mind is looking for anything that can attack us instead of prioritizing the specific goals that we want to achieve. And what's really fascinating about this process, in surveying 10,000 entrepreneurs internationally, we uncovered the following results. Only 7.6% of people resulted in being catalysts. 49% of people resulted in being synergists, 39.8% guardians, so the guys below the 50% threshold, and 3.5% as defenders, who are exhausted individuals, they can't think clearly, they're experiencing brain fog and potentially depression, and they need to go out and seek help. So what does this result actually tell us? Well, it tells us a vast percentage of the entrepreneurial population is struggling not just with their psychology, but also their biology. The problem with our current society is when individuals start experiencing these kind of symptoms is we see them making excuses, procrastinating, they don't want to get off the couch. But we diagnose that as them having a weak mental attitude and they just need to toughen up and get on with the job. I grew up on a cattle farm in country South Australia. I know all too well this particular cycle of having to constantly push through with willpower. The problem with willpower is it's finite. It runs out. So if you're making a ton of decisions on a daily basis, you will not only experience burnout of willpower, you'll also experience what is called decision fatigue. There's a finite number of decisions that we can make on a daily basis before we get to the end of the day, and we can't even think what to cook for dinner, or if a partner or someone asks us a particular question, we simply can't answer it because we've already hit that decision fatigue threshold. It's also important to state that nutritional deficiencies, side effects from medications, as well as toxins, can mimic psychological disorders including anxiety, aggression, and depression. So if someone is trying to reach an ambitious goal, but their energetic requirements don't meet the needs for them to achieve that specific ambitious goal, then the primal mind is going to make that decision for you. Yes, you can push through with willpower for some time, but when that runs out, you're going to burn out. Our main objective is to first of all identify what these underlying issues are and the triggers are, address them, get them out of the way, fuel our brain so we can do the psychological work, and suddenly you don't need to apply willpower anymore because you're operating at your absolute best. Now, what identity type are you? This is easy to find out. Head over to areyouunstoppable.com, take the 30-part questionnaire to find out precisely what identity type you are, your susceptibility to stress, fatigue, as well as illness, and get specific nootropic, wearable devices that help you to biohack your way back to health, and other strategies personalized to what you're currently going through right now. So if you're making excuses, you're having to overuse willpower, you're constantly fatigued, this is one of the best steps that you can absolutely take. And be sure to grab a copy of my brand new best-selling book, Unstoppable, on Amazon or anywhere books are sold. In the meantime, have an awesome week, and I will see you next week for more unstoppable tips. Take care.